Here in University of Gujrat, my first time here, and what I saw yesterday and the energy that the campus is bustling with was very impressive, and I'm thankful to all of you and to the people who have invited me to speak on this topic today. It is very difficult to give an overview of the entire corpus of Islamic political thought in 15 to 20 minutes. What I will do, inshallah, over the course of this short period is to uncover those principles, the principles behind Islamic political thinking in various parts of Islamic history. But it will not only be restricted to Islamic history, we must go back to the origin, to the very origin of Islamic thought itself, which goes back again in the principial plane and into the Quran. Now, the first source, the most fundamental source of Islamic political thinking, of all Islamic thinking, is the Quran, is God Himself. We cannot say that such and such philosophy is Islamic if it is not linked to the sources that are Islamic. A distinction has been made over the last decades, a distinction between Islamic thought and Muslim thought. And I think that I like to use the term Islamic thought because of the connection of the sources with that quality of the thought that is being taught. If that link is not there, then you can call it then as maybe modern philosophy or Buddhist philosophy or whatever kind of philosophy that is, that school of thought is connected to. By default, these days, it's often modern thought. So then there's another connection, another issue that emerges. Well, can Islam and modernity be compatible? And that's a very long debate. We will get a chance to go into this throughout the day. And towards the end, of course, I can say a few words about that as well. On the surface, it does seem that yes, they're compatible. But when you dig deeper, we find that there is a difficult relationship between modernism and religion itself. Keep Islam beside for a second. Take all the world religions and look at the challenges posed to them by modernism. Look at the earliest responses of these religious communities around the world to the concepts of modernism. And then we find that there is indeed an uncomfortable relationship which one must acknowledge. Now, Islamic political philosophy, again, is linked to Islamic philosophy and theology and Islamic mysticism, Sufism, if you will. And it is interesting to note that you don't find a vocation in the Islamic tradition, an exclusive vocation, an exclusive career of a political philosopher. It happens later on in Islamic history, in the early modern period of Islam and in the modern Islamic history, but it doesn't happen in the earlier periods. There is no such thing as only a philosopher, a political philosopher. The earliest philosophers were all polymath, polyglots, knew many, many things from astronomy to astrology to metaphysics to the inner structure of music to algebra. They were almost, their insight into the things was very, very penetrating. And they were not specialists in the narrow sense of the term. We don't find specialists on Islamic political philosophy in our early period, just like we don't find such figures in other religious traditions as well. This has a significance. And if we see that the political philosophy that has been done in the Islamic tradition, it always happens towards the end. Al-Farabi, who is known for Al-Madinat al-Fadila, a famous treatise on human associations, including political ones, begins his work by ilahiyat and metaphysics, not by politics. So the discussion of politics always takes place towards the end and almost never towards the beginning, because it is a realm of multiplicity which is left towards the end, and we always begin with unity. The Muslims throughout the history have been called the Muwahidun, the people of unity. The Quran itself is a message, a symbol of unity, pointing towards God, who is Himself perfect unity, indivisible. So the Quran is the eternal message to mankind. It's an eternal message for Muslims. It's a message that is true in its eternity and its perenniality. It is at once eternal and perennial. When we read it, its perenniality comes to our attention. And when we look at how evergreen this message is, it was valid 1400, 1500 years ago, and it is valid today, and Muslims believe it will be valid in all the times to come until the end of this historical cycle and the Yawm al-Qiyamah. The Quran is very clear on the mission of mankind. According to Quran Kareem, the mission of mankind is salvation. The ultimate object of all of us is salvation, is maghfirah. All of us are here today, we will die tomorrow. And all of the things that we attach so much importance to here and now in this world will come to naught at some point when life is over. At that point onwards, our total life, of which this physical life on earth represents only a small arc of the total circle of life, will continue afterwards. And the Quran says, God says in the Quran, that you have to care about your maghfirah. It matters little what you go through in this world, as long as you're on the right path and your afterlife, you're saved. Because you don't want to be in a position where your afterlife is jeopardized. And Quran admonishes us, it's full of premonitions against that condition from which we must save ourselves using these principles. So the ultimate end of human existence is salvation. Quran is also replete with all of different types of messages, different types of commandments, allegories, many different types, qualitatively different types of statements that God makes in the Quran, which are geared towards creating a social order, an economic order, and a political order that is conducive to the attainment of salvation. That the political structures, the Quran is silent about. The political order, economic order, and the social order that Quran is talking about is that which is conducive for us to attain salvation. That the social order and the political order should help us attain that ultimate goal that we just spoke about. It should not deter us from that. That is most fundamental. If we veer away from this, the quintessential truth in the Quran, that is its connection with in creation of a political order, it is this. If we move away from that, in my opinion, then your philosophy gradually will become Muslim, not remain Islamic, and even it will remain Muslim for so long because it's associated with the names who are from a Muslim background, and very soon it's something else. This is the crux. The Quran itself was also known Al-Furqan, it's called Kitab, the mother of all the books, and Al-Furqan, the book of discernment, the book that allows you to know what is right from wrong. It's very interesting. And here, it is due to this discernment that it becomes the basis for all sorts of knowledge and action. Whether it is science, whether you are involved in political philosophy, or Ilm al-Imran, science of societies, sociology, what have you. The basis of Islamic philosophical thinking, and hence Islamic political philosophical thinking, is this notion that Quran is a basis of all knowledge and action for the Muslims. Moreover, it also gives us a notion about human nature. Quran gives us clues about human nature. If we look at Thomas Hobbes, if we look at all of the later European political philosophical history, starting from Machiavelli onwards, we find that there is a special vocation of a political philosopher. He is not anything else but a political philosopher. And they have assumptions about human nature. Thomas Hobbes had an assumption that everybody is with war with everyone else. That everyone's war against everyone else. That was his assumption. That was not rooted in the truths of Bible, or in the truths of Old Testament, or in the truths of old Manichaean dualism. Similarly, when Muslims think that who are the ones who need to be governed, It is Muslims who need to be governed. And who are Muslims? Muslims are human beings. Well, what is the nature of human beings? What type of rule is conducive to ruling that nature, that fitrah that the Quran is talking about? And it becomes very, very important that we get our first clues about who we are from the Quran, upon which there's so much doubts are cast because of evolutionism and progressivism and all these false ideologies that have come and paraded themselves as truth, have all come and cast a doubt upon all of these religious scriptures that belong to the axial age. But very important that we learn, we get our clues of what is human nature, what is our fitrah from the Quran. Second, the Prophet. Prophet of Islam, alayhi salatu wasalam, is the perfect man, al-insan al-kamil. The Quran says in Surah 33 verse 21, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ أَسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. In the same surah verse 56 it says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَلَائِكَتَهُ يُصَلُّونَ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا صَلُّوا عَلَيْهِ وَسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. That God is praising the Prophet in the Quran and asking him to offer salutations to the Prophet, to that exalted being amongst all of you who is human, but because of carrying the burden of truth, that exalted human beings has become an al-insan al-kamil. Therefore you must mold yourself in the footstep of that figure. This is in the Quran. And then we get a lot of ahadith in which the Prophet was asked that how, if you are the perfect amongst us, how are we to remember you? And he said, if you want to remember me as best as you can, follow the Quran, the exhortations of the Quran. So there is an inseparability of the text of God, of the word of God, with the character of the Prophet, with the being of the Prophet. These are inseparable. And so in the first clue that we get for the basis of all Islamic political philosophy must not negate the Quran and must also be based on the Quranic worldview. The second most important thing is the Prophet. That he has two natures. He has a nature that is nasuti, that is of this world, and he has a nature that is lahuti, which is not of this world. He is a person who has died before he has died. He is a person who is a perfect ruler, a perfect judge, and a perfect leader. He is the archetype of all rule. The Covenant of Medina, the Misaki Medina, in which the Prophet actually employed all these principles, become the basis for the theory of caliphate, whether it was Al-Mawardi or Ibn Sina, or it was Imam Ghazali, or in the theory of imamate in the Shia political philosophy as well. It is the Prophet who is a prototype of perfection as far as rule is concerned, because in him there is congealment of power, and there is a strong nexus of spirituality that does not sever away from political. The moment you sever away this connection of spirituality from the political, your political environment, it's a matter of time that it will continue to rot until it falls flat on its face. And this is not just Islamic experience, this is experience that is shared by many other religious traditions. So the Prophet himself, what does he exemplify? What is he an exemplar of? We have called him the perfect ruler, the perfect judge, the perfect leader, the perfect general. It's not like the Christian or the Jewish origins of Islam. Islam was in the habit of winning from the very early on despite all odds, and this is ingrained in the Muslim consciousness. So his attributes are that of piety, combativeness, magnanimity, strength, nobility, and serenity. Let me quickly explain what these virtues are, because it's very important that we look at the theory of caliphate that will develop through history until the Sultanate periods in the light of the prophetic model. He is the most pious. We know what piety is, taqwa. His combativeness has the spirit of jihad, which is against nafs and also against the enemies, in which he is not a quietist, he is not a pacifist, and he is the most peaceful person. But if there is disorder in society, picking up the sword is not a problem. He is magnanimous, faragh dil. He is a person with an open, with a lot of generosity to give. His strength, his physical strength and his spiritual strength, his psychological strength is exemplary. And he is full of sharaf and takreem. He is noble. And his serenity is coming from his being imbued in God, al-haq. God is nothing but truth. And if you want to be truthful, if you want to be on the path of truth, you must repose in God. And so this is the type of personality that has become the prototype for rule. The Quran itself and the Prophet's model also is silent on what type of rule, whether we have democracy, whether we have this or that. It talks about the virtues of the principles of rule. It is very important that we bear this in mind when we look at the panoramic study of Islamic political thought throughout history, that it is the principal virtues of rule that our sources are talking about, not the types of rule, types of governance, the structures of governance. They can change over time, and we can accommodate that. But that we will also talk about in just a second. Then after the Prophet, the principles enshrined by the four rightly guided caliphs, radiallahu ta'ala anhum, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, Umar Farooq, Osman Ghani, and Ali Waliullah. All of these four rightly guided caliphs are following the mantle of the Prophet. They are not veering away from the path of the Prophet. They may not be as perfect as the Prophet, but they are more or less on the same path. And after this, then we have a period when the Khulafai Rashidun are gone, when the Prophet is no longer there, and now the Muslim community has become so large that it is spanning all four corners, at least on the east and west. It has become a very, very large empires. And these empires are expanding, of course, after the generation of Khulafai Rashidun, and then the period after that, in less than 100 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, Muslims are everywhere, in all of these places, from east to the west. This brings, for the Muslim community, new predicaments. Now this is also the time of new thinking. Our initiatic power, with the zapping power with Islam came onto the world scene, has now, that moment is gone. But the initiatic spirit is still very strong, and the people who are still alive are those who have met the ashab of the Prophet, who have direct knowledge of the Prophet, the people who are alive who have seen the Prophet, or tabai tabi'in, who have met the generation below that. In this time, then there is a philosophical schools begin to develop. We have, and this is a very long period again, this is a 1,000-year history of intellectual history, but I will just quickly give you a foretaste of thinking, the type of quality of thinking that we get in Al-Farabi when he writes Madinat al-Fadila. And this is very instrumental, instructive for today's condition in Pakistan. Al-Farabi says that the faulty associations and the wicked associations will corrupt the society. And the virtuous city is the city of God. Again, there is, before Al-Farabi, has a very, very large corpus of knowledge that has been already produced by the Greeks. And this Greek philosophy, in its earliest form, we're not talking about the Olympic Greek philosophy, we're talking about the Orphic Greek religions and their last impact of the Orphic Greek religions on the thinking of Socrates, on the thinking of Plato, pre-Aristotle. A lot of interesting things, important things were said. And Al-Farabi had read all those things. Prophet ﷺ was Al-Nabi Al-Ummi, he was unlettered, he was illiterate, he did not know these things. And he had given what was needed to be given. But after that, we find that the Muslim scholars had to read all that had come before them. They had to read the Greek thought, they had to read the Egyptian thought, they had to read the Indian thought, and the Persian thought. And they integrated, synthesized all of the things that were of value within the Islamic worldview. So this is not just as it is sometimes presented by many Orientalists, that Islamic thought is not original, it's just Islamic philosophers have cooked up this and that for the Neoplatonic schools or the Peripatetic schools and presented it as Islamic. That is complete nonsense. We have actually a very long period in which the Muslims co-participated in the translations along with the Christians, and these texts remained within the Muslims for a very long period of time to think about and to produce commentaries upon commentaries upon. And it is under these conditions that Madinat al-Fadila is produced, in which Al-Farabi has exposed, as far as political philosophical thinking is concerned, is the types of associations. He upheld to some degree the Platonic framework, but he added many things to it. The best rule, according to Al-Farabi, is by the one who knows most. The best rule in the Muslim consciousness was Misaq-e Medina, was the Prophet's rule in Medina. After that, the second most important type of rule is by those people, a group of people who know most. And then a group of people who are generals. So the first one is the Platonic philosopher king, the prophet statesman. The second one is aristocracy, the spiritual principles that are still fresh in the minds of those leaders who are the rule of the aristos, of the first people who are wed to the principles. The third type of rule is then democracy with the T. The rule of the generals, the rule of the brave, rule of the powerful. And so that is still not as bad as what is about to come. And then after that is the rule of business interests, oligarchies, plutocracies, rule of business interests, people who rule in the name of profit, who promise you profit and who themselves benefit from profit. The philosopher king is not interested in ruling. He is brought to rule by the people because he knows most, and he would rather not leave his contemplative abode. But then he takes it as a job that has to be done, and he knows that he's the person who has to do it, so therefore he takes it up with a lot of nuisance. This type of rule, the generals also may or may not be willing to rule, the brave people, the type of Sayyidina Ali. And then you have the later types in which the business interest. The business community is interested in ruling. They want to have political power because they can benefit, they can profit from the rule. And then after that is yet another form of rule that you'll be very familiar with, that's called democracy, the rule of the people. The Greeks as well as the early Islamic philosophers all thought that this is one of the least desirable form of rules. But it is still better than one type of rule, which is anarchy, no rule, lack of rule, complete chaos, dissolution. So why is it that now this is a very touchy topic because people are here willing to die in the name of democracy, and we want to problematize this issue is whether to what extent democracy is compatible with Islam or not. Volumes have been written on this. My own professor John Esposito has written this volume called Islam and Democracy. He does case studies of all the Muslims, 6-7 Muslim states, and says whether Islam and democracy were compatible. Then we have many people, the modern period in which we enter. Again, I'm going to take a thousand-year jump and come to Jamaluddin Afghani, Muhammad Iqbal, Rashid Rida, Muhammad Abdu, Hassan al-Banna, and also Maududi Khomeini and Rashid al-Ghanoushi until the present day. Now this is the modern period in which, again I have omitted some names, but this is the type of period in which the Muslim world has entered. That when the Muslims ruled the world, they were a minority. As soon as they became a majority, they fell down. So Muslims had swollen in numbers in a very, very large numbers, but they could no longer be the masters of their destiny as they once were. What are the causes of that? Soul searching began. And all of this period, the modern Islamic history, starting from Al-Afghani onwards, again, is that soul searching. And we come up with many answers, and there is no agreement by any sense on these things. But we see that within this, several different types of thinking emerge. First is the European type of thinking, modernist thinking, that we need to now become secular, just like in Europe, religion had gone down and the humanist forces had taken ascendancy, and due to which they could make progress and look at where they are and look at where we are. The second is, so these are the modernists. Second is reformists who say, no, we need to actually maybe have a Protestant style of Reformation, and we can keep some of Islam and keep some of modernity, because they seem, it is the findings of Islam are the same as finding of modern science, and people such as Maurice Bucaille, who are talking about La Bible, le Coran et la science, the Bible, the Quran, and the science, in which he goes at length in convincing that Bible is not compatible with modern science, but Islam is, Quran is. And I think these types of work has to be taken very, very carefully, because the presuppositions of modern science themselves are not kosher, in my opinion. They are not, in their very root, they conflict with the spiritual message, because it is actually a materialist type of worldview that negates, that was born on the negation of the spiritual worldview. So today, and my time is running out, so I would like to conclude, but today we have come to a point where the sources of Islamic thought are still with us. The Quran is still in our pockets. The example of the Prophet and the love of the Prophet is mandatory in Islam. He is still in our hearts, yet we cannot produce an order. And I think this is where the message of Allama Iqbal is so important. The importance of snatching the reins of power. The importance of snatching the reins of power by hook or by crook, because it will have transformed us completely as people that we don't want to be. We have today become a nation of thugs. We don't form lines in front of a ticket counter or cinemas or what have you. We don't trust each other. We have become we only want to become self-servient. We want to cater to our own needs and do not care about the other. We have lost the principle of empathy. We have become something we don't want to become. And I think that Iqbal, rahmatullahi alayhi, had a vision. Whether we agree or not agree with the totality of his thought, because he died in 1938 and a lot has happened since then. He died what was the early modern age of the Muslim world. It was the middle modern age of the Western world, and since then the contradictions of modernity and the effects of modernism were not apparent on us. So it would be a grave injustice, in my opinion, to simply reduce Allama Iqbal to being a modernist, as many people have done. And I think that the aroma of the Islamic tradition, from the Quran to the love of the Prophet and also the works of later Islamic philosophers, were very much part of his poetry and his prose, which we must not forget. And I think that this whole business of secularization of Pakistan, that we must make Pakistan secular, because the only other alternative that is given to us is Taliban, and therefore we must become secular. That is such nonsense. And I think we must stay clear of this path, in which we have to recognize what is happening to those countries that have become secular in their core. How is the family doing there? Do they have a future? What kind of politics do they practice? Do we want to be like them? And I think that there is a limit to secularity. A type of secularity which was separation of church and state doesn't apply to Islam. A type of secularity which was accommodation of all religious tradition is very much part of Islamic tradition from the very early on. But the type of secularity which is that we can insult our icons of perfection and get away with it in the name of free speech is just not on. And it will never be accepted by the Muslims. And I think that this is the type of secularity that those people who are in control of the media, our media and the international media, control of the educational institutions, they are all want to rob the last iotas of this Islamic mess that remains amongst us. And I think that this project that has begun in Pakistan by portraying the secular side of Jinnah, keep Iqbal behind the door, bring Jinnah, show his secular side, I think this will implode. But it's very important that we are aware of this, what is going on, that Jinnah himself was not completely secular. And if you look at his speeches that are ostensibly secular and his speeches that are very, very Islamic in their identity and content, we have no mind that he was a person who was fighting for a Muslim homeland. Why? Otherwise you could have just be fine. If it was so secular, what was the problem? I mean, we could just have lived with the Hindus. Obviously there was a breakdown, so he was a champion of that. Let's not forget that. And Iqbal, on the other hand, is directly intoxicated by the love of God. Read his poetry. He may be cynical of mullah here and there, but that's fine. We are also. But he was within the bosom of Islamic tradition. And I think this is a very, very important year, as if I've overheard that this is going to be the year of Iqbal. And I think our younger generation, I want to impart this notion, this sense of confidence in our tradition, Our spiritual tradition of Islam and its sources must remain close to your heart, otherwise we will lose track. Walhamdulillahi wahdahu wa bihi nasta'in.